Good morning, everyone. Life on Earth has come a long way since we were microorganisms near a hypothermal vent to now anxiously texting someone back, hoping that they're not mad at you because you read their message and you forgot to respond. We all exist in this particular biosphere, intertwined and impacting each other in ways we may not even have considered. Communication has always been important to every single living organism, from your cells needing to be sending messages to your surrounding tissues, to your project leaders having to contact you once again to ask when you will finally be submitting your final TEDx draft. For humanity, language specifically has played a vital role in this component to fill out this critical role. Language is a structured system of human communication, consists of grammar and vocabulary, where it's a means of expression. Notice, though, how although other animals too are able to communicate certain information to each other and convey them through actions, they do not use language to its truest sense because they do not communicate with the same level of complexity and form. When our ancestors first became bipedal, being able to walk on two legs, it started anatomical adaptations within them. This changed the position of their skull as well as the anatomy of their throat, leading to humans being able to produce a much wider variety of sound. A well-known theory to how language was developed is credited to the naturalist and geologist Charles Darwin, who from 1871 believed that language began from people imitating the sounds around them, like from animals and tools, where this later transitioned into them being able to use the sound to talk to each other. That, however, doesn't quite happen anymore as we stopped talking with grunts and animal sounds to each other quite a while ago. Having developed, our ability to hold on to language can in ways be credited to us being primates. Having grown much larger compartmentalized brains and cortices, this provided us with a greater cognitive ability than other animals. Some, like Noam Chomsky, believes that language is an innate skill. He suggests that a basic template for all human languages is embedded within our genes. This pushes forward the message that despite all languages having their unique different traits, the interconnectedness of this tool can still be subconsciously recognized, even without us being aware of it. Thomas Schoenman from the University of Indiana believes that language is a set of interactive, adaptive behaviors rather than just physical traits, where the changes in a brain and its circuitry relevant to language in any generation would most likely only be slight modifications to what already exists, instead of major changes in the way language is processed by the brain. Changes are adaptive only if they increase and enhance the ability and maximize the advantage of the pre-existing abilities of others in your community. This is, again, how language is a survival mechanism. An example of the opposite would be something like developing a fur coat due to a cold environment. The thickness of one's own fur coat would not depend on the thickness of someone else's. Due to this, my lovely audience, if you take away any grain of information from this talk, let it be this. We as people need each other. Nature has altered us in such a way that we would not be able to survive without relying on each other. This is why interconnectedness of people is so important. Evidently, it can be seen in the language evolution, where being better than someone doesn't necessarily mean that linguistically it's an evolutionary benefit. Because if you cannot understand someone well, the adaptiveness of a language will not help you. Then, therefore, the adaptiveness of a language would depend on the flexibility of those in your group who are also simultaneously trying to respond to you and change with you. This is why Gretchen from Mean Girls was unable to make fetch happen. Her community simply didn't agree. A major change and characteristic of Homo sapiens in comparison to other species is that they do not have to start from scratch from every generation, where we are connected to those who came before, unlike newborn animals who only have those in their family and in their group to rely upon. With language, we use the knowledge and information we have been provided from before to build upon it or take away for things and parts that we deem as necessary. where the reason language changes is to better suit our needs. Linguistic evolution has long held its place in history, where these changes in language are not simply just trends. An example of this would be the development of Angolan Portuguese, which has a small difference in its vocabulary to mainland Portuguese, where this difference came from the influence of local languages and dialects. The reason this language variation had come about in the first place is due to colonization in the 16th to 18th century, where it made sense to learn Portuguese, both economically and politically, as it would help connect the nation to an entire network of trade. However, the Europeans also used their language as the administrative language, where in their colonies they kept indigenous people away from power because it was a language for the elites. This created social divide, class divide, and of course, discrimination. Those who could not speak the language were kept away from the government, where in general, colonization usually happens under the guise of modernization. Colonizers often forbade natives speaking their own native tongue. This has had a lasting impact on Angola, as although they have gained their independence, Portuguese still dominates the linguistic policy of the country, as it is the country's national language. However, for most of us here, the reason we learn English, this lingua franca of the modern world, is because it helps provide us with opportunities as everything around us continues to rapidly globalize. This common language that a lot of people know, right? So it makes sense to learn it. Just like how in 1938, the teaching of the Russian language became mandatory in all schools that were non-Russian across the Soviet Union, as it would promote a greater unification and therefore the interconnectedness of the Soviet people. I currently do Ukrainian lessons, and to the dismay of my Ukrainian teacher, keep making common mistakes. However, I find it interesting to point out that if everyone makes the same mistake linguistically, then does it matter? It's like the concept of acorns, where it's a result of the misinterpretation or mishearing of something which creates a new phrase, yet it's still plausible in the same context. So, if it becomes the default and is then standardized, wouldn't that make the communication between people even easier? Some other variables which bring about the change in language can be seen in things like technological advancements, where people now need new words to explain them. Or something we can more personally observe is the language changing due to innovations brought forward by the younger generations. This frequently involves the modification to vocabulary, inclusion of slang, or even the pronunciation of words, where it can one day gain more widespread acceptance. A very recent example of this would be my friend and her usage of the word skibbity. This also brings about and reminds us of the influence now the internet has to the development of language, where it's a word that holds no inherent meaning, and it's almost used like a filler word. Yet, she still seems to be following some sort of grammatical rules, applying it to conversations as an adverb, where it has slowly been spreading across the cohort. I find it a little bit bizarre and honestly scary how people have latched onto this word, but it evidently shows the bond it has fostered within the school's community. But paradoxically, something which was created to connect us can also be used to separate us further. Like earlier mentioned, language can be a tool for social divide, where we can personally witness this in real time in places such as international schools. Although obviously a lot less extreme, students would sometimes rather stay in groups with people that they're familiar with and who know their language better because it takes less mental energy when you're exposed to stimuli you're used to. It's easier to process, and it's the mere exposure effect. Evolutionarily, it's like that because it's something we're familiar with, so we think it would be less likely to hurt us, or at least in ways we don't expect it to. This is, of course, an evolutionary development. But this could then obviously create negative effects for both parties, where since one would possibly feel excluded and othered, the other could also be minimizing their exposure to perspectives outside of their own. It may or may not have been done for this reason, for this purpose, but as humans, we crave community and need each other. But of course, it's certainly something to consider. At the end of the day, I feel like language is a tool, and it's a privilege that we have to hold, since it can connect us to not only others who speak it, but also foster a link with a culture's history and ancestry due to knowing how much this language has been throughout time. Some may quite reasonably fear the disappearance of the uniqueness of their own language that it holds, which, while others may view those traits as no longer necessary as we continue to modernize and our ways of communicating our needs changes. However, either way, whether we want to or not, change will occur. We evolutionarily need it. So there's no reason to try and run away from the inevitable where we are simply trying to avoid genuine social connection. With instruments like language learning apps at our grasp, why not see what else the world has to offer so that we can better connect the society around us? Thank you.